There are some traditions that are not born out of wisdom, but out of fear. In the ancient kingdom of Ajanaku, long before the world became softened by questions and reason, the people believed in a truth that governed both their lives and their deaths. No king must ever walk alone in the land beyond. It was not merely a belief, it was a law, one woven so deeply into the fabric of the kingdom that to challenge it was to challenge the very balance between the living and the dead. The elders would often speak in hushed tones of the first king who defied this unseen rule. He was buried with honor, wrapped in golden silence, but alone. For 6 nights, nothing happened. The kingdom slept peacefully, convinced that death had claimed him completely. But on the 7th night, something changed. The earth above his grave began to shift. At first, it was subtle, so slight that it could have been mistaken for the restless movement of animals beneath the soil. But then came the sound, a low, hollow cry that seemed to rise not from the air, but from the ground itself. It was not the cry of a man in pain. It was the cry of something unfinished. By the time the grave was opened days later, there was no visible disturbance to the king's body. He lay exactly as he had been placed. Yet the soil around him had been loosened, clawed at from within, as though something had struggled not to escape, but to be heard. From that moment, the kingdom decided that death was not an end, but a passage that required companionship. And so, a new tradition was born. When King Adwale died generations later, the law remained unbroken. Unlike the kings before him, Adwale had ruled not only with authority, but with a quiet, calculating awareness of the unseen. He listened to the priests. He honored the shrines. But beneath his calm exterior was a man deeply unsettled by what awaited him after his final breath. It was said that in the final months of his life, he often asked a question no one could answer. What happens when a king refuses to be followed? No one dared respond. Because in Ajanaku, such a question was not just dangerous, it was unthinkable. The announcement of his death spread quickly, carried not by messengers, but by silence. Markets closed before noon. Laughter vanished from the streets. Even the wind seemed to move more carefully, as though aware that it was passing through a kingdom standing at the edge of something inevitable. And then came the choosing. 7 maidens. It was always 7. No one remembered exactly why the number had been chosen, only that it had never been questioned. The number itself had become sacred not because it was understood, but because it was feared. The names were called at sunrise, each name falling like a stone into still water, each name sealing a fate no one would speak aloud. Among them was Amara. Amara was not the most beautiful, nor the most quiet. She was known instead for something far more unsettling in a place like Ajanaku. She asked questions, not loudly, not rebelliously, but persistently. She had once asked why the moon followed the same path every night. Another time, she asked why the elders spoke of spirits with certainty, yet feared them like children. And now, as her name echoed through the courtyard, she found herself asking a question that no one around her dared to form. If the dead have already crossed over, why do they still need the living? The 7 maidens were taken into the palace and treated with a kind of fragile reverence. They were fed the richest meals, dressed in the finest fabrics, and spoken to with a softness that felt almost like apology. But beneath the kindness was something unmistakable: finality. As the days passed, the palace began to change. It started with small things. A door left open that no one remembered touching. Footsteps in corridors long after the guards had retired. A sudden drop in temperature that seemed to follow the maidens wherever they went. Then came the dreams. Each of them began to dream of the same place, a vast, empty space with no sky and no ground. Just darkness that stretched endlessly in every direction. And in that darkness, a presence, not visible, but aware, watching, waiting. Amara was the first to wake from the dream screaming, not out of fear but out of realization. "He is not waiting for us," she said, her voice trembling not with panic but with certainty. "He is alone." The others tried to silence her. They reminded her of the law, of the consequences, of the stories that had shaped their lives since childhood. But Amara could not unsee what she had felt. The presence in the dream was not calling. It was not demanding. It was enduring. On the 5th night, the voice began. Not in dreams, but in waking. A low whisper that moved through the palace walls like a breath that did not belong to the living. It did not call their names. It did not ask them to come. It only said one thing, over and over again. Too many. By the 7th night, fear had taken on a different shape. It was no longer the fear of dying. It was the fear of something that did not want what had always been given. The burial took place beneath a sky that refused to hold the moon. The grave was deeper than any before it, wider, waiting. As the maidens were led forward, the drums beat slowly, each sound echoing like a warning buried beneath tradition. One by one, they stepped closer, until Amara stopped. Her refusal was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and far more powerful because of it. "I will not enter a place that does not call me," she said. At first, nothing happened. Then the ground shifted, not violently, but deliberately, as though something beneath it had finally decided to respond. The voice that emerged was not the voice of a king. It was something older, something heavier, something that carried the weight of every silence that had ever been forced into obedience. You were never meant to follow. The earth trembled not in anger, but in release. For years, they have sent you. The voice broke, not with weakness, but with something far more unsettling. Exhaustion. "I have been crowded." The realization spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. This was not a ritual of honor. It was a mistake, repeated for generations. The ground collapsed inward, not to consume but to close, to correct. And for the first time in the history of Ajinaku, a king was buried alone. In the days that followed, the kingdom did not celebrate. There was no sense of victory, only a quiet, uneasy understanding that something fundamental had shifted. The tradition was never spoken of again, not because it was forgotten, but because it was finally understood. Yet even now, the elders say that on nights when the air feels to still, and the earth to quiet, you can feel it. Not a presence, not a voice, but space, as though something somewhere beneath the ground is finally alone. We've come to the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from.